Intro bonus, take one, 5, 4, 3.
Hey, and welcome back to Beyond the Noise. So much has happened since we last touched base. Not only are we faced with a persistent coronavirus pandemic which has killed over 400,000 people worldwide, but we're also witnessing an unprecedented anti-Black racism movement across the globe. And we can't shake off the gruesome video that reignited the Black Lives Matter movement. A video showing George Floyd's death by asphyxiation after a white police officer pressed his knee against the black man's neck for over 8 minutes as his 3 other colleagues stood by and did nothing. We won't be showing you these horrifying images here. For one, because you've probably seen them played over and over on TV or social media, but also because it would ironically equate to a modern-day version of the public lynchings that took place between 1877 and 1950 in the US, a period during which 4,000 African Americans were killed as white people gathered to watch the public spectacles. Now, 2 weeks into Floyd's death, and the marches have grown relentless and spread in all 50 US states, with protesters demanding justice not only for Floyd, but also for Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, who were both killed in Louisville, Kentucky, and Brunswick, Georgia, and all the others whose death wasn't caught on camera. The data is indeed edifying. According to mappingviolence.org, since 2013, Black people were 38% of people killed by 100 police departments, despite being only 21% of the population in their jurisdictions. But the struggle against anti-Black racism and police brutality has surpassed American borders. In Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Africa, thousands have shown solidarity for African Americans and also voiced their anger about similar issues within their own countries. In Bristol, in the United Kingdom, protesters toppled a statue of slave trader Edward Colston, while the city of Antwerp caved to the public pressure and removed that of colonial Belgian King Leopold II, who presided over the deaths of millions of Congolese people during his rule. Brussels might soon follow suit. Now in France, over 23,000 people took to the street over the weekend to call for justice for Adama Traoré, a 24-year-old French Malian who died in police custody in the Paris suburbs almost 4 years ago. Black people the world over are forcing the societies they move within to reckon with some uncomfortable truths, to acknowledge the often unjustified violence that we suffer, as Cameroonian philosopher, great thinker, and professor at the University of Witwatersrand, Achille Mbembe, explains.
Frantz Fanon et plusieurs autres ont longtemps évoqué cette espèce de peur.
Frantz Fanon and several other authors have addressed this irrational fear. Irrational in the sense that we're scared of them because we believe that they are different from us.
Également, dans la mesure où...
But we're also afraid because of our similarities with them. In any case, it's a fundamental fear, an original fear.
Peur originaire.
This unjustified fear is translated in the case of regimes based on slavery and racism, like the United States, in a sacrificial agenda. The United States are the United States as a nation. It needs to sacrifice a black person repeatedly, moment after moment, time after time. That is to say that the sacrifice of a Negro's life is not an accident. Anti-Negro racism will decline when Africa will stand tall, the day when Africa will become its own force, its own power. There's a direct link between the fate of blacks all over the world and the fate of the African continent.
Africaine, les Noirs, partout dans le monde, et le destin de notre continent.
Now, the reckoning of the commonalities of Black experiences is nothing new. It actually dates back to the late 19th century, when African and Black diaspora thought leaders fought hand in hand for the end of imperialism, freedom, and racial equality. Amongst them were a thinker known as the founder of modern Pan-Africanism, W.E.B. Du Bois, whose ideas were so unpopular in his country, the United States, that he emigrated to Ghana upon the invitation of his peer and then Ghanaian president, Kwame Nkrumah. Pan-Africanists dared to reimagine the place of Black people in this world and fought for indelible unity within the people. But when we zoom into the African continent today, that vision is far from reality. In a country like South Africa, for instance, where apartheid ended 30 years ago, violence against women and foreigners of African descent have risen in the last decade. In a country where the ruling party, the ANC, is black, the policing of poor black people remains far too frequent. As Achille Mbembe tells us,
La police est devenue un problème universel.
The police have become a universal problem in liberal democracies, in authoritarian regimes, and in contemporary tyrannies.
C'est devenu un problème universel.
It's become a global issue, partly because of the times we're living. The vast majority of countries in the world live in a state of emergency right now, as we speak.
Dans l'état d'urgence.
The police have become a military force or a paramilitary force everywhere. The reality is that in South Africa, the police are no longer white police. It begs the question, why haven't they been able to deracialize the police?
Déracialiser la police.
We have to admit that efforts have been made, but we still have some dramatic situations. A few years ago, when the police killed 47 minors who were protesting for more rights in Marikana, and just last month, the police killed 2 other people.
La police a tué 2 personnes.
Ultimately, the paradox is that the way in which the police treated and persecuted black bodies under the apartheid rule has not disappeared.
Cette façon n'a pas disparu.
Today, this violence is increasingly reported on the bodies of migrants.
Grands Africains. Et je crois que le grand...
I think this great protest movement that we're seeing, led by the youth in South Africa and elsewhere, rallied behind the idea of decolonization. This call for decolonization is, to an extent, the equivalent of the Black Lives Matter movement, in as far as both movements aim to imagine that space of refuge, of radical hospitality that would finally allow us to live without having to constantly justify ourselves.
Expliquer constamment.
now some of you may know that I am both Nigerian and Algerian. I've always claimed that double identity, which I am proud of. But when I visited Algiers growing up, I quickly became aware of my skin color, as white Algerians, so to speak, would refer to my family of Sahrawis from the south as Khalish, a negative term used to refer to black people. And in the last weeks or so, I came across several posts from Algerians saying things like, Black Lives Matter is an American issue, or wondering why we're not speaking of the violence suffered by Palestinians every day in Gaza. This kind of discourse, if you ask me, is the people of color's version of All Lives Matter. By demanding that people shift their focus from Black Lives Matter to another struggle, you stand to undermine the struggle of black people who are taking advantage of an unprecedented momentum to advance their condition. And frankly, to think that systemic and institutional racism, colorism, or even xenophobia only exist elsewhere is simply false. Last year, Algeria came under widespread criticism for its policy of deporting migrants by sending them into the Sahara Desert and onto Niger. According to a report by the Middle East Monitor, over 14 months, Algeria had dumped over 13,000 people, including pregnant women and children, in the desert as temperatures hit 48 degrees Celsius. It forced them to walk, sometimes at gunpoint, without giving them any food or water. In Mauritania, where slavery was abolished in 1981, the system still entertains inequalities and the mistreatment of Haratins, also referred to as Black Moors, who make up about 30 and 40% of the population. Amnesty International is among a plethora of NGOs who've denounced the systemized racial discriminations in the country, saying that the government continues to deny the existence of slavery, but thousands remain enslaved. Activists have faced arrest and torture simply for speaking out against exploitations. Even after being emancipated, former slaves in Mauritania are relegated to the bottom of the social ladder. This week on our interview segment, we're passing the mic to an African female storyteller from Ghana. Maame Adjei's debut in acting was in the hit show An African City, set in Accra. She's now working on her very own film and has been advocating for some time for Africans to tell our own stories. Maame and I had a frank, unfiltered conversation about Black Lives Matter, inequalities and classism in Africa, and why she no longer cares for diversity and inclusion. Have a listen.
How are you doing today, Mel?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good considering just everything that's happening in the world and my personal life. I'm doing good, taking one day at a time. Yeah.
How important do you believe the role of storytellers, Black storytellers, African storytellers are in this context where often Black people, African people in particular, are put in boxes, or the narratives around our experiences are unidimensional?
First of all, we're the only who can tell our stories with all the dynamism and complexity that they hold. You know, Nina Simone has a quote that I love, which is like, the artist's duty is to reflect the times. As storytellers right now, our duty is to reflect the times, is to showcase what is happening back to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think our duty is also to hold retrospective of the times, because I think a lot of times Black people's stories start from a certain point. Meanwhile, we've had years, hundreds of years of history, hundreds of years of beauty, hundreds of years of turmoil that we do not even know about, that we do not discuss, is showcasing the past, who we were, who we were before all these labels, these stereotypes, these energies were placed on us to weigh us down. Who were we? And I think that's really important in building your self-esteem. And that's something that other cultures have. Hollywood is built on reflecting to a lot of white Americans how great America has been. Mm-hmm. They have period pieces from God knows when that showcase their greatness and their grandeur. We need to have that as well.
How effective is it to talk about all those issues, to bring up and bring forth the history, the complexity of African experiences, and also to raise the fact that there's a lack of diversity in storytelling in the rest of the world, in Western countries? If this remains just a Black thing, are we gonna get through? Are we just doing it for us, or is it also something that we have to be able to export to make mainstream?
I think I was a part of that. Like, I believe that, yes, we need more Black faces in mainstream. But honestly, I don't care about diversity within mainstream. Mm-hmm. I care about us seeing ourselves to each other. Are you, as a Black person in Gambia? Are you, as a Black person in Colombia? Are you, as a Black person in the States, seeing yourself on any medium, on any platform? Do you have access to seeing your history, your images, your stories, your narrative? I don't want to hear about lack of diversity within systems that were not built to include us.
I think African people and the Black diaspora as a whole have been craving this kind of content.
Yeah, right? I think the stories in the Western world are getting very mundane, very one note. And there was a time before the Black Lives Matter movement resurged where African stories were very sort of exotic. Mm-hmm. And so I've just bought into the belief, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, that whatever I need to do, whatever work I want to create, I can create it from here, and it can have global legs, if that's what it's going to do. That's not my, it's not my goal anymore. My goal is really to create the work, for the work to resonate with the people that the work is for. And anything after that is amazing.
Police brutality is reality in many African countries. Systemic repression of civilians is a reality in many African countries. How does it happen that the Black Lives Movement creates this effort? Is it something that we really can tap into to also address the issues that we have on the continent?
In the beginning, what I felt was just silence from us as Africans. It especially like elite African, I can speak for Ghana specifically, but I feel like this is a widespread African thing. Like within a lot of African countries, we suffer from classism first, you know, before anything else. And I think that there's an initial feeling of this, we have nothing to do with this, which I felt was so hypocritical from a country like Ghana, my country, where we had done this whole campaign of the year of return and come back and diaspora. And it's like, okay, the diaspora need us now. They need our voice. But obviously that's turned because there have been widespread marches, widespread support for the movement. And then it sort of forced us to look at our own internal trauma and systemic like injustices, like even within the police. I know that there was a marching in Accra last week, and then the police shot at people, hurt people, called them a terrorist group. In most African countries, the police are somewhat corrupt. Mm-hmm. And these are things that we speak about in really small bottleneck terms. But when we see other people sort of reaching out for their own justice, we're like, listen, what about us? Women are being sexually abused and raped in Nigeria. We haven't had justice for them. So we're going to fight for those things as well, as along with this global movement that's happening. I think sometimes you have to see somebody else sort of sit up straight and say, I'm not going to take this, to believe in your own strength to say, I'm not going to take this. And I think that as much as sometimes the Africans and African Americans seem very disconnected, in this way, what they started all the way in the States has sort of given people here the confidence to also speak out for the things that they feel they're not doing justice for.
Well, that's it for this week's Beyond the Noise. I'll see you again next week.